I divorced my wife of 20 years after discovering she cheated back when we were dating. Imagine dedicating 2 decades of your life, your entire adult existence, to a love you thought was unwavering, built on trust and shared dreams. Now imagine that perfect world shattering into a million pieces, not with a dramatic fight, but with a single, seemingly innocent comment at a dinner party. The truth, when it finally hit me, wasn't just about infidelity. It was about a betrayal so deep, so insidious, it had been silently woven into the very fabric of our shared history for 20 agonizing years. My wife and I, now in our early 40s, had what most people would call a beautiful life, a real fairy tale romance. We started as high school sweethearts, she a senior, I a junior, and our bond felt unbreakable. We navigated the challenging waters of a long-distance relationship when she left for college. I stayed behind to finish high school and then started community college. Those 2 years were tough, but we made it work, always talking, always planning our future together. Eventually, we were both in the same city, inseparable, building our life side by side, and we married the summer after my college graduation. For 2 decades, I honestly believed our marriage was a wonderful, rock-solid foundation. Then, just after Christmas, a casual reunion with a few of her old college friends turned my entire world upside down. We were all at dinner, the atmosphere light with laughter and shared memories, reminiscing about the good old days. My wife casually mentioned we'd met in high school. She didn't specify that we were dating back then, just that we'd known each other since high school. One of her old college roommates, oblivious, piped up, "Wow, that's incredible. You guys met so young, had your wild college years, and still ended up together." I played along, a little naive, jokingly saying I wasn't sure my wife had been quite as wild as I might have been. A harmless joke, I thought. But then, that's when everything shifted. The roommate started to share a story, a specific anecdote, but my wife abruptly, almost violently, cut her off. "I feel uncomfortable," she said, her voice tight. A cold dread, a primal instinct, began to creep into my gut. Why uncomfortable? My senses were tingling with raw, unfamiliar suspicion. I felt a sudden, urgent need to clarify. I looked at the roommate, then at my wife, and stated, as calmly as I could, "Actually, we started dating in high school and remained together exclusively throughout her entire college experience." The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. An awkward silence descended upon the table, suffocating us all. The rest of the evening was noticeably tense, almost unbearable. Every glance, every hushed conversation, felt charged with unspoken truths. As we were finally leaving, one of her other roommates pulled me aside, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and urgency. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. "You really should have an honest conversation with your wife about what really happened during her college years." The uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at me solidified into a sickening certainty. I couldn't shake it. On the way home from dinner, the silence in the car was deafening, even more so than the tension at the table. I asked my wife about what her roommate had hinted at, my voice carefully neutral. She blew me off, a dismissive flick of her wrist. "It wasn't a big deal," she insisted, looking out the window. I pressed again, feeling a surge of fear mingled with growing anger. "It is important to me that you be honest," I told her, my voice strained. But she brushed it off again, almost irritated. "It's not important, really." Her dismissive attitude, that casual shrug, only fueled the fire in my gut, hardening my resolve. My suspicion wasn't just a tingle anymore, it was a roaring blaze. When we finally got home, I knew I couldn't let this slide. Not after 20 years. I looked her directly in the eye, my own eyes probably reflecting the storm brewing inside me. I told her firmly, "I'm going to stay at my brother's house tonight. I'll come back when you're ready to talk about what truly happened during your college years." It was a line in the sand. The next day, she showed up at my brother's, visibly anxious, the weight of the truth finally pressing down on her. And then she admitted it. She'd slept with several men during those first 2 long-distance years of college. She tried once again to downplay it, saying she hadn't considered it a big deal at the time because we were long-distance and she didn't think our high school romance would last anyway. Not a big deal. The words hit me like a physical blow, a ton of bricks slamming into my chest. Anger, betrayal, a crushing, devastating sadness all surged through me simultaneously. My mind reeled. How could she have done this? My entire past, our shared history, felt like a lie. I pressed for more details, my voice trembling, barely under control. That's when she confessed to at least 10 different men. And then came the real gut punch, the detail that truly twisted the knife. At least 3 of those guys were men she had introduced to me as friends during my innocent weekend visits. And one of them, a mutual friend, was still in our lives, someone we'd seen regularly for years. My world didn't just implode, it disintegrated. How could she have lived with this deception for so long? This wasn't just infidelity. This was a calculated, years-long deception, woven into the very fabric of our daily lives, a thread of lies running through every memory, every shared moment. I knew, with absolute, gut-wrenching certainty, our marriage, built on a foundation of such profound deceit, couldn't survive. My voice, now barely a whisper, but firm in its resolve, told her, I want a divorce. I'll start the paperwork immediately. There was no turning back from this. If you're finding yourself gripping the edge of your seat, trust me, you're not alone. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what comes next, or any of the other raw, real stories we share. True to my word, the divorce process began on January 2nd. Her attempts to minimize her actions, to dismiss my agony, to make me feel like I was overreacting, they only cemented my decision. This wasn't about a few mistakes made in college. This was about the profound lies, the utter disrespect that had silently spanned 2 decades of our marriage, eroding its very foundation. The pressure from outside was immense. Most of our families, her friends, they all told me I was making a terrible mistake, that I should forgive and forget. Don't throw away 20 years over a few mistakes, they pleaded. Everyone makes mistakes. You should forgive her for the sake of your long history together. But this wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern of deliberate behavior, years of conscious choices made behind my back. Cheating with multiple men for 2 years, and then concealing it for 20, was not something I could simply overlook, no matter when it happened. The fact that she continued to maintain relationships with these men, even introducing them to me as friends, right to my face, that was an unacceptable level of contempt, a violation of trust one couldn't comprehend. Our children are 17 and 19, practically adults, and I truly hoped they would understand why I needed to preserve my self-respect, my integrity. I felt like I was losing my mind, caught in a whirlwind of voices urging me to forgive, to forget, to salvage what we had built. You're being unreasonable, they'd say. Focus on the good times. But how could I, when every single memory, every shared laugh, every tender moment was now tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of her betrayal? It wasn't just the act of cheating, it was the deceit, the decades of lies, the continuation of friendships with the very men she cheated with. How was I supposed to trust her again? How could I look at her the same way, knowing what she did, and how she so casually dismissed my feelings when I confronted her? I kept questioning myself, wondering if I was overreacting, if I was being too harsh. But then I'd remember the visceral pain, the searing anger and betrayal that surged through me when she admitted her affairs. I remember the nights spent wondering how she could introduce me to those men, how she could maintain those friendships without a hint of guilt. This wasn't something I could simply get over. This was a fundamental breach of trust that had shattered our marriage into irreparable pieces. Was I wrong for leaving? No. I felt like I was fighting for my dignity, for my right not to be lied to, not to be disrespected in such a profound, soul-crushing way. It wasn't about revenge. It was about acknowledging that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. The gaslighting was relentless. My wife and some of her friends insisted it was normal to sleep with other people in a long-distance relationship, and that I was the odd one out for expecting fidelity. They made me feel crazy. But it wasn't some casual, ambiguous relationship, and it certainly wasn't a transcontinental separation. We saw each other a couple of weekends a month. I lived only about 3 hours away from her college. This wasn't some fleeting, uncommitted fling for me. We were unequivocally exclusive. Back then, dating culture was different. Exclusivity was the default expectation for most couples. We even had a long, difficult conversation about maintaining our long-distance relationship before she left, and she was adamant about staying together. She even joked that her dad would come after me if I started sleeping around. And then there was my senior prom. I suggested going with a platonic female friend, and she got so upset that I ended up skipping my own prom to avoid hurting her feelings. Our commitment, our exclusivity, was implicit and deeply understood. I even followed up with that mutual friend, the one she cheated with and was still in contact with, the one who married another mutual friend. I needed to understand. He was genuinely shocked, told me he had no idea we were dating back then, and immediately blocked her on social media out of respect for me. That brought a sliver of clarity amidst the chaos, but also a fresh wave of pain. I learned from another friend, the one who first pulled me aside, that 10 guys was likely a low estimate, and there was even at least one pregnancy scare during those college years, a horrifying detail she had never once mentioned. Initially, I was open to therapy, genuinely desperate to salvage something, to find a way through this wreckage. But her constant insistence that her actions were perfectly normal, that I was the one overreacting, it was too much to bear. She only showed a flicker of remorse, a brief offer to reconcile, when the divorce paperwork actually started and she realized I was serious. But that brief moment of contrition quickly evaporated, and she reverted to her original stance, insisting she was right and I was overreacting. The constant back and forth, the gaslighting, the invalidation of my feelings, it was absolutely maddening. She consistently minimized my feelings, treating them as an overreaction to something trivial. It was like she was rewriting the rules of our entire relationship and expecting me to accept them without question. Her refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of her actions, coupled with her attempts to normalize infidelity, only deepened the rift. I reached a point where I had to protect my own mental and emotional well-being. I couldn't continue in a marriage where my feelings were dismissed and my trust was so utterly shattered. Her lack of genuine remorse, and her insistence that I was the one out of line, made it impossible for me to see a path forward together. I wasn't overreacting. I was standing up for myself and my right to a respectful, honest relationship. And then, just when I thought I had processed everything, 2 more pivotal revelations came to light. 2 things that made it absolutely crystal clear I had to end this marriage, not just for my pride, but for my long-term sanity and happiness. These were the true deal breakers. First, about 10 years ago, we hit a rough patch and went through a period of almost 2 years without any intimacy. She'd mentioned that our physical relationship was becoming monotonous, so I tried to bring some excitement back. Nothing extreme, just some light role play and novelty items. But it turned out she was fixated on some intimate experiences from her college days, experiences she was not comfortable discussing. She wanted me to recreate those experiences, but when I tried, it made her feel awkward and guilty because it reminded her of other men she had been with. The fact that she insisted these experiences were meaningless, yet they still had the power to affect our marriage a decade later, told me they were far more significant than she was ever willing to admit. It was like a ghost in our bedroom. Second, and this was the final, absolute deal breaker, she confessed to flirting with coworkers during business trips since the pandemic ended. She claimed nothing physical happened, but it had progressed to the point where she actually went on a date with one of her male colleagues. A date, after everything we had just been through. After 2 decades of marriage, after the recent exposure of her past infidelities, she was still willing to cross that line. These revelations didn't just shatter my remaining trust, they annihilated it completely. The first issue showed me that her past betrayals were not just historical facts, they were still actively haunting our present, poisoning our intimacy. The second issue made it brutally clear that she was willing to cross boundaries again, even after all the pain and the crumbling of our marriage. These 2 factors combined made it utterly impossible for me to see any hope for salvaging our marriage. It was over. We had the difficult conversation with our children, our 17 and 19-year-olds, informing them we were getting a divorce. We explained to them that it stemmed from bad decisions made during college, decisions that we, as a couple, had been unable to move past. My 19-year-old, who's currently in college herself and has unfortunately experienced her own painful share of untrustworthy boyfriends, looked at me directly and asked if I had been unfaithful to my wife while she was away at school. This question caught my wife completely off guard, but to her immense credit, she bravely admitted to our children that she was the one who cheated. We both agreed to refrain from sharing any more specific, painful details with the kids, understanding it was essential to protect them. I reassured them both that despite the separation, both of us remained fully committed to being there for them. I emphasized that we were both in therapy, individually and together, to ensure we handled the divorce in the best possible way for our family's well-being. Furthermore, I made it clear to them that if they ever felt the need to talk about the situation, whether with us or a therapist, they had my full and unwavering support. Their emotional health was our top priority. The divorce process itself, surprisingly, became mostly amicable. We began discussions with a mediator, and it quickly became apparent that we could part ways without a huge fight. Both of us are financially stable, free of major debts, and with our kids being older, custody wasn't a significant concern. My 19-year-old daughter, given her past experiences and the fact that I was the one who left the house, initially suspected I was at fault. Seeing her father leave the family home might have seemed like an admission of guilt. But my wife made it clear to the kids that she was the one who had been unfaithful, and I wasn't overly concerned about the narrative after that. I also noticed that my wife seemed more prepared to move on than I was, which honestly stung a bit. It's hard to see someone walk away from a 20-year marriage with what felt like relative ease. I was fairly certain she was already looking for a new partner. The mediator even explicitly mentioned that any infidelity before the divorce was finalized could jeopardize our amicable settlement, a stinging irony, given that our divorce was rooted in infidelity. She was visibly annoyed by this topic. I also suspected that my continued presence, even crashing in the guest room, might have been hindering her prospects of moving on quickly. In the end, we finalized our divorce, and everything is now official. We managed an uncontested, amicable divorce with minimal disagreements. Our lawyers collaborated through mediation, and a judge signed off on it a few weeks ago. The process was straightforward, thankfully. The only significant complication was related to our 17-year-old, who was absolutely adamant about staying with me due to a deterioration of their relationship with my ex-wife. Initially, my wife resisted, ready to challenge the uncontested divorce. But our son, wise beyond his years, made it clear she could either allow him a few months to process and rebuild their relationship, or force him to stay with her until he turned 18 and risk never seeing him again. Although I felt his stance was a bit harsh, it prompted my wife to back down. We moved forward with the agreement that I would have primary physical custody until his birthday later this year. I've continued to encourage my son to remain open to mending his relationship with his mother, reminding him that despite her past actions, she did care for and love him for 17 years. As the divorce proceedings advanced, I've noticed him spending more time with my ex-wife, which gives me real hope that they will eventually reconcile. This has been a challenging time for all of us, but I'm optimistic that with time, they will be able to rebuild their bond. Financially, we divided our retirement funds and investments equally, 50-50ths. My wife really liked the house, whereas I didn't, so she kept the house and most of the furnishings. To balance things out, she took out a mortgage to pay me back for half of the equity and half of the estimated replacement value of the furniture. Most of our other belongings were easy to split. She kept her car, I kept mine, and we divided our personal items like my music gear and her hobby equipment, along with clothing and personal effects. For anything that was harder to divide, we agreed to sell it and split the profits. Thankfully, we had already documented most of our valuable items for an insurance writer years ago, which made this process smoother. Things have been going remarkably well for me personally. Both of my kids spend most of their time at my place, and we have maintained a close, loving relationship, which was my biggest concern throughout the entire divorce. I'm incredibly relieved and grateful that this bond remains strong. I've moved into a new house that I truly love, a place that feels like a genuine fresh start. And in a slight nod to my midlife crisis, or perhaps just a celebration of new freedom, I traded in my old minivan for a sleek Lexus LC550. It's a decision that has brought a surprising amount of joy. On another positive note, a woman at work, someone from a different department, so we don't work directly together, invited me out for a coffee date. I was upfront with her, explaining that I'm not ready to date just yet, that I'm still healing. She was incredibly understanding and graciously offered to take a rain check, expressing her willingness to go out with me when I'm ready. This invitation was a pleasant surprise. She's incredibly smart, has a great sense of humor, and our professional roles are distant enough that there's no awkwardness at work. My ex-wife and I are still attending couples counseling, but now it's purely focused on achieving closure for our marriage and ensuring we can co-parent effectively. These sessions have been invaluable for processing everything and maintaining a healthy, positive environment despite the circumstances. However, they've also powerfully confirmed that divorce was, without a doubt, the right decision. It's become evident through our discussions that my wife began dating as soon as the divorce process started, indicating that whatever love we had was already fading. I'm pretty sure the coworker she claimed was just a friend even dropped her off at our most recent session. Surprisingly, this didn't really upset me, which is a clear sign that I, too, was truly ready to move on from the marriage. In the end, healing from this deep betrayal will take time, certainly, but I feel like I'm making real, tangible progress. I can confidently say that the divorce was the right choice. I've shed more tears in the past 4 months than I probably did in the last 20 years combined, but for the past month, I've genuinely felt good about myself for the first time in a long while. I'm enjoying my newfound independence, staying busy helping my 17-year-old prepare for college in the fall, and yes, quietly looking forward to that coffee date with a smart, funny woman in a month or two. The arduous journey through our divorce taught me the invaluable importance of honest communication. Looking back, I wish we had been more transparent with each other from the start. Honesty could have prevented so much of the pain we both ended up feeling. It's a profound lesson I'll carry forward in all my future relationships, romantic or otherwise. Most importantly, I've discovered a strength within myself to rebuild, to move on, and to feel genuinely good about who I am again. So, after hearing my story, all the twists, the turns, the moments of utter disbelief, I have to ask, what would you have done in my shoes? How would you have navigated such a profound betrayal that spanned decades? And how would you have found your way to healing? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know your honest thoughts.